Hey, everybody. Today I have for you podcast number 87. Today's podcast is titled, These Shoes Won't Get You to Where You're Going. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. We are Dr. Pete and Sandy Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network, where we flesh out the limitations that are preventing you from reaching your goals and living the life that you were called to lead. And we are super excited to bring you this podcast because, well, we've got some pretty cool stories to tell you today. And we always want to start off by thanking you all for listening, taking time out of your day to listen to the podcast, to like it, to follow it, to subscribe, to share it with friends. We love the feedback that we've been getting, and thank you so much for being a loyal follower. And I know this week we're excited because we're also traveling. We're going to be hopping on a plane and flying down to South Carolina to the Sherman Chiropractic College annual Lyceum, which is a huge deal. It's like the biggest event the school puts on. And that's where our son Luke is in college right now, studying to be a chiropractor. And I'm excited to connect with some of the other docs down there and just to experience what South Carolina has to offer. So that's fun. Let's get on with the show. Today we've got a really cool title. These shoes won't get you to where you're going. So we got a really interesting story to start off with. Want to start off with the...
Sure.
Yeah.
So the backstory, Sunday I went down to visit my parents and we went up to their family camp to open it up and turn the water on. And my dad... this camp was in his family, so he grew up there as a child, and my dad is in his 80s, so he likes to reminisce about things from his childhood there, and so he often tells us a story about the stone wall and fireplace that he was to help this Swedish mason build when I think he said he was about 10, and so he was telling me about it again this Sunday, and the man gave my father the job of sifting sand to be used to build the brick wall. And he said the man had set up several bricks high, and all of a sudden it started tumbling. And he's found a tiny pebble in the mortar that he had made that my father obviously didn't sift well enough, and started swearing at my father in Swedish and yelling at him and threw, you said, a milk bottle at him.
Yeah.
But when he was telling me again, I thought, well, this is a great teaching lesson for our podcast because so many things came to mind, like this tiny pebble caused the wall to fall.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So it's such a great story because he tells it at least once a year, I think. And the name of the mason was Charlie Lindquist.
Yeah.
So you can't leave that out.
That's right. Dad always gives the accent.
Oh, and he threw his milk jug at him as he went running across the thing because the guy was just swearing at him in Swedish. Hey, you didn't sift the sand. So anyway, it makes me think, like, do we sift the sand? You know, it's one of those tasks that you give a little kid to do because you think, well, how they can't screw that up, right? But the focus of a little kid is oftentimes what?
How can I get it done so I can go swimming or fishing?
Right. Like he wanted to go jump on the stumps and go chase the snapping turtles and do all the fun stuff that little kids like to do. He didn't want to sit there in the hot sun and sift sand with some, older guy. And this was, back in the late 1940s. So different era. And, but we'll think about the mundane tasks that we oftentimes don't want to do or maybe don't pay attention while we're doing them, and we don't do as good of a job. And here's this old world mason trying to do a great job doing it the old fashioned way. It wasn't like he had ready mixed concrete where you just add water to it, right? This is something that he had to go through and do it properly. So, I think that we will oftentimes neglect the small details, and the small details that we do continuously and habitually. And I think we saw that same attitude in Italy when we were there, is that they paid attention to the small details, and those small details added up to become great masterpieces. And many of the things that we saw as far as architecture, artwork, food.
Yeah.
Yeah. So super, super interesting. And, so think about that with your own life. Are you really focused and paying attention to the small details? Because even the smallest detail, like a little pebble, can really topple down something big that's going on in your life.
Right. And it might be something like, I don't think my father thought it would matter. Like I could relate to that, right? If I were a young child sifting this, I'd be like, doesn't really matter if they're all out. But I think that in our own lives, like there's things in our lives that we allow, little things that we think don't matter, but they really do. And I think like biblically, we talk about foundation, and is your foundation rock solid, and what's it built on? Well, if it's built on this pebble or this sin or this mental hang up we have, then it's not that strong foundation that God desires for us to have.
For sure. So that brings us to point number 2. And this came from our sermon this week at church, which really like to thank Pastor John for providing, content for our podcast every week. He said something that was really profound. He said a couple of things that were very profound, and our church is going through a big expansion right now. But one of the things he said was, the shoes that took you this far will not take you to where you're going. And that really indicates like, wow, okay, I've worn these shoes and they have been great. And they have served a purpose for this time, and it has taken me so far, but this is not the end. I'm not finished. There's further to go, but it's time to take these shoes off and put on new shoes to go further. And okay, we change our shoes for different occasions and so forth, but it's a different idea when you start to think about, okay, I've got further to go than I ever thought, and there's a new pair of shoes that I need to get. I need to get the right shoes to take me to the next level. So that's equipping yourself. That's growing. That's expanding. That's just something that is really super powerful when you can get a hold of that idea.
Yeah. Pete, what would you say to those who might be thinking, well, those shoes still have a lot of life in them and I'm comfortable and they're worn in and I don't want to put on a new pair of shoes?
Yeah. What do you think I'd say? I'd say, yeah, that's great. You can camp, right, for a little while where you're at. And I've heard that metaphor as well, where you're hiking up a huge mountain, and there's a time and a place when you're going to surge and keep climbing, but there's a time like maybe weather sets in where you've got to stop and camp. And it's comfortable at the camp, but sooner or later you have to break camp. You have to put the fires out, you have to roll up the sleeping bag, pack the tent, throw it on your back, and now it's time to proceed upward. Otherwise, you'll never get to the top.
Yep.
Right? So, you have to strap up your hiking boots, and maybe you got to put crampons on because you're going to deal with ice. Who knows? I mean, there's all kinds of thoughts that go into my mind when I think of hiking, but in life, it's time to move on sometimes. It's time to put on a new pair of shoes for what's in store, what God has in store for you next.
Yep. Very good.
So that brings us to point number 3. What's that?
Updates and renovations. We had a lot of renovations going on the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I guess. You've been doing a lot of behind the scenes work preparing for this. He's a builder in his off days from chiropractic, and he's been building new partitions for the office and finally got those in place this weekend. And practice members were all excited and really noticed the changes.
Yeah, it was kind of cool yesterday, first day in the office. Just everybody, on staff coming in and seeing them for the first time. All the docs coming in, looking at them, and wow, those look really good. And it's great to receive accolades, but what was better yet was just to see how people take on change differently. Like some
Mm.
people are like, I'm not so sure if I like these yet, but I think I do. Like they were afraid to like pass a positive judgment, even though they couldn't really find anything wrong with them.
Mhm.
And then, but most people were like, yeah, this is great. Wow, you must be expanding. Things are growing, things are happening. And you know what? Change is a sign of life. I mean,
Mhm.
we're in springtime in central New York right now, and every week everything is just getting greener and greener, and we have leaves, budding on trees, leaves coming out. So change is inevitable. It's a sign of life.
Mhm.
And if you're not changing, what's happening?
You're dying.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, updates and renovations. Are there places in your own life where you need to update, where
Mhm.
you need some renovations? It could be you need an update in your wardrobe. It could be that you need to do some renovations in your home. It could be that you need to do a makeover of your own health profile. Who knows? But there are places where we need to look periodically for updates and renovations.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Pastor touched on this topic as well on Sunday, and that we shouldn't resist. Like he said, his phone is constantly wanting to update, and he'll put it off, put it off, put it off. And, we can do that in our lives, putting off a change or an update that we know we really should step into. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't put it off, if you put it off long enough, eventually your phone becomes useless.
Yeah. Same with our
I
minds and,
know.
right?
So
Yeah.
true. So
Hmm.
true. And that brings us to point number 4. That was a really good segue, Sandy.
Ah, it is, isn't it? We're staying on the computer
Oh my gosh.
topic.
Yeah. The next point is the firewall.
Hmm.
So, what's a firewall?
Well, in a computer sense, it's something like a antivirus, right? It protects your system. And I said to Pete, like, we need a firewall in our lives in lots of different areas. And this came up. Grace was gifted a lovely box of books. And I preview what she's going to read. And so it took me a good 3 weeks to get through and preview these books, not reading them all, but all the way through, but reading few chapters here and there. And just alarming what some of these bestsellers for teenage girls presented, and just crazy. Anyway, I guess I won't go there. But realizing like we need to have firewalls and filters for all areas of our life. And that was one that just was very relevant to us this week.
Yeah, and you may think that these things are they're just not a big deal, right? They're just no big deal, but if you're not paying attention to these things, they start to incrementally slip into your life, and and you just get accustomed to them. It's kind of like your first gray hair. You're like, oh wow, I have a gray hair, and then the next thing you know, oh, I got a couple of gray hairs. And after a while, your whole head of hair is turning gray and you're looking at ways to color your hair. But, it sneaks up on you gradually. And the next thing you know, it's everywhere. And negative things, sinful things will creep into your life and they seem innocuous. They don't seem like they're any big deal. But after a while, they incrementally grow into
Hmm.
something that you just can't build off of anymore.
Yeah.
And you really lose the spirit.
Well, and I think we become desensitized to
That's a
the
great word.
negative effect, like say TV shows, right? Little by little, there's these things, and you just tolerate a little bit, and then it's a little bit more, and it's a little bit more, and then you're like, where did we get where we're allowing this on in our house? So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. So, yeah, do you have a firewall installed and is it effective?
Hmm.
And that brings us to point number 5. You can't wait for change to happen to you. And this has to do with something that I said over the weekend, and it has to do with sacrifice versus valuable. Like, how do you see yourself as a sacrifice, or do you see yourself as something that's a valuable tool and asset? Um, so you want to speak to this a little bit?
Well, we were talking about someone we know who let their health slide. And this person is a phenomenal provider for their family, well known in the community, and we were just discussing, like, how does it just get that far? And that's when you said this, like, this person has seen themselves as a sacrifice, like they had to sacrifice their time and their health and maybe their own interest because of being this provider for their family. And Pete was saying, if they could see the value in themselves and that they couldn't, that they couldn't allow themselves to be a sacrifice, we could tweak that a little bit. So that's where this came up.
Yeah. So I guess what is on my mind about this is I have a couple of friends like this.
I thought of another example.
Yeah, just another one last night. And these people are very good at what they do. I mean, they're rock solid at what they do and true leaders in their field of expertise. But it's come at a cost. Mm-hmm. And that cost is actually limiting their ability to continue at the level that they're so good at. And one of these guys has actually gone through some major medical issues and was hospital bound for 40 days on a ventilator. And I had no idea until he reached out to me recently. But, all of these things happen gradually, incrementally over time as he's sacrificed other aspects of his health in order to be such a high performer in these other areas of maybe in business or family. Mm-hmm. So, if you were to ask a grandkid, would you like your grandfather to take better care of their health so that they could be around and do more things with you as you grow up? They would always say yes. They would always say that if they love their grandparent. And they would spend whatever money they had. I mean, a kid that saved everything that they saved, they would spend their life savings to help a grandparent do whatever it took to be healthier. Mm-hmm. But yet we oftentimes hold back and sacrifice ourselves because we don't see how valuable we are to others that care about us.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that is never really spoken about to the degree that it should be.
One of our trainers, Josh Lewis, I was training under a female trainer at his gym, and this topic came up, and I think I questioned the cost for myself to train. And she said to me, but we had been doing this for our teenage son. Mm-hmm. And she said, but you don't have any problem spending that on your son each month, but you do for yourself. And that kind of hit home. Like, if we're to be providing and leading our homes, then why would we not invest in from the top, right? Because then we can better serve those that we're raising up.
Yeah, that's such a great example. Yeah, thanks. Well, I think we've covered some really great points for you all to think about, pray about, but most importantly, take action.
Yeah.
You know what you need to do. You know your areas that you need to grow in. Those are the mundane things that you need to just get real with and get after them. So we encourage you. We're pulling for you. We're excited to hear about your future results. So just keep chipping away. And, that's all we have for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. Be sure to tune in each and every week so you can stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. And we will see you back next week.
Have a great week.
Great week.